Hello everyone, my name is Akos from the re.Planted Urban Farm, and in today's video we are going to be opening our winter sown jugs. So this is the part 2 of a two-part series on winter sowing in zone 3 using pop jugs. So go ahead and watch the first part of our video if you haven't already. So let's get started. Back in February, we sowed 32 pop jugs as part of our winter sowing experiment. We wanted to see if the method would work in our super cold climate. And it looks like for the most part we might have success, but we're gonna find that out soon. Our jugs have gone through some of the coldest days in our winter and also some of the hottest days. The idea behind this method is to grow seedlings that are hardy, without having to be hardened off when you bring them out, and without requiring grow lights in order to grow. So this method tends to work better for cold hardy plants or perennials, and so that's what we sowed. Back in February, there was still 2 feet of snow on the ground when we planted these jugs. We buried them in snow, and then a month later, we had a very early spring melt. It was still cold in the evenings, but we left them where they were. And then in April, we had some of the hottest days so far this year. It was very unseasonably warm, but we left our jugs. I've watered just one single jug since we planted them back in February. I also had to move the jugs because they were under our roof, where when it rains, a lot of the water was pooling in the jug, and because the snow hadn't completely thawed, the jugs were just sitting in water. So I decided to move them to a place where we weren't having those watering issues. And then also, once I realized that they weren't actually getting full sun, I also moved them one more time to put them in a location that was ideal for sun and for rain. So these jugs have been fending for themselves otherwise. So let's open them up and let's see what's happening. What are some of my final thoughts? What would I do different? What did I like about this method? Well, first, I wish that I would have put a little bit more soil. So they recommend filling the jug with 2 to 6 inches of soil. I was super stingy with the soil. I went with the minimum 2 inches, and I wish I had gone with a little bit more. Because the jugs are so narrow and I cut so low, there was actually this like 2-inch band where there was no sun because of the tape. If I had planted, if I had put a little bit more soil and it was a little bit deeper, then the plants would have been above that tape line so that they could get as much sun as they needed. One other thing I wish I would have done is actually open these jugs a month ago. It was so busy, so I didn't have time. We were prepping gardens, getting new beds in, planting, sowing, etc. And these jugs were a little bit neglected, so actually a lot of them that did germinate ended up like dying in the heat, because it essentially is like a greenhouse in there. And even my greenhouse is on super hot days. I have to open up the doors, open up the windows, let some air in. And I hadn't done that with these. Had I opened it a month earlier, I could have opened and closed the top to vent, and very likely would have had much more success with some of these seedlings. One other thing that I noticed is the roots on a lot of these, again, because I was so stingy with soil, quite a few of them are quite root bound, which tends to leave plants in a place of distress. So no matter how acclimatized they are, it's just going to be so difficult for me to actually rip them apart when it's time to plant, that they might end up being a little bit stressed once they go in the ground. Not weather stress, but just root stress. So I do wish I would have, again, given a little more depth, been a little bit more generous with the soil, so the plants each had a little bit more soil to work with and to grow in, and it wouldn't have been so hard for me later on to actually transplant these guys. Okay, so final thoughts. I'd absolutely try this again. Most of the ones that germinated were actually perennials, so I very likely won't be planting them again. I just don't need that many perennials of the same variety. But there are a few of these that didn't work well, that I didn't have backups indoors, that I definitely will try again with the winter sowing method next season. So would I try this method again, and would I recommend it to you? Absolutely. I've also seen people in warmer climates try things like tomatoes and peppers, those warm season crops, with this winter sowing method because they just have a long enough season. We don't, unfortunately, so I will not be trying those plants in there, but I will go ahead and try those cold hardy and perennial plants. So that's it for this update, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you see the value in actually growing with the winter sowing method, and I hope you try it yourself next season. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.